Hello and welcome to Lahore Live with Indus News and me, Usman Lone. Well, we begin this bulletin with Afghanistan as the Afghan Taliban have freed 2 hostages in exchange for 3 senior Taliban leaders. Australian Timothy Weeks and Kevin King from the United States were released 3 years after being kidnapped from Kabul in 2016. The swap includes Haqqani Group leader Anas Haqqani and 2 other senior commanders. Government officials said the deal is aimed at restarting talks with the Taliban. Pakistan's Prime Minister welcomed the move and said Islamabad facilitated the prisoner swap to bring peace to Afghanistan. Well, staying with news in Afghanistan, and Chief Executive Abdullah Abdullah has accused the government of killing an election observer and wounding 2 others. He said the government used force on people protesting in Kunduz against the resumption of a vote recount. Earlier, the Afghan Election Commission claimed issues with candidates have been resolved and the recount resumed across the country. Abdullah's party demanded an impartial probe into the clashes. Former President Hamid Karzai said reports of forces opening fire on protesters are a matter of grave concern. Meanwhile, security officials and the Office of the Afghan Election Commission rejected the allegations. Now, 3 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party have been killed in Turkish airstrikes during a counter-terrorist operation in northern Iraq. In a statement, Turkey's National Defense Ministry said military operations backed by air power were carried out in the Hakurk region. The ministry said Turkey will continue to destroy weapons caches and shelters used by terrorists. It said over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 4 months. Turkey holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of over 40,000 people in a 30-year terror campaign against Turkey. Well, Russia's defense ministry said Turkey's threats to launch a new military operation in northern Syria could aggravate the situation. The ministry said Moscow fulfilled its obligations on the withdrawal of Kurdish fighters from the Turkish-Syrian border. It added that Russia is sending more troops to secure a proposed safe zone inside Syria. Earlier, the Turkish Defense Ministry has warned of another operation if the area is not cleared of Turkish fighters. Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said the US and Russia did not fulfill its responsibilities under a peace deal agreed last month. Well, the EU has rebuked Washington's attempt to legitimize the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, saying all settlements in the Palestinian territory are illegal. In a statement, EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini said the settlements erode the prospect of lasting peace. Mogherini urged Israel to end all settlement activity in line with its obligations as an occupying power. Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the US backing the Israeli settlements will escalate tensions in the region. Earlier, the US backed Israel over Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank, reversing its 40-year-old policy. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo argued the buildings are consistent with international law.
The Trump administration is reversing the Obama administration's approach towards Israeli settlements. U.S. public statements on settlement activities in the West Bank have been inconsistent over decades.
Israel claims it intercepted 4 rockets fired from Syria. Meanwhile, Syria's state media reported explosions were heard near the airport in Damascus. Israel's military said in a statement that the launches were located in Syria and intercepted by Israeli air defense systems. The army said no rockets hit any Israeli community. The United States says it will end a sanctions waiver for Iran's Fordow nuclear facility next month. Last week, Tehran announced it has resumed uranium enrichment at the site because of non-compliance by signatories of the 2015 nuclear deal. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said there is no legitimate reason for Iran to resume enrichment at Fordow. He said Iran should not be allowed to enrich uranium at any level and must immediately reverse its activity at the facility. Well, the US says it will impose sanctions on Egypt if it goes ahead with the purchase of Russian warplanes. Washington can impose sanctions under its Sanctions Act that targets the purchase of military equipment from Russia. Government official Clark Cooper said the deal risks Egypt's future military acquisitions. Cooper said using the Russian Su-35 fighter jets could pose a threat to Egypt's ability to operate jointly with the US and other NATO countries. Earlier this year, Egypt signed a $2 billion agreement with Russia to buy over 20 Su-35 fighter jets. Well, US lawmakers are asking the government for regulations making it harder to sell sophisticated technology to China's military. Senator Chuck Schumer and Republican Senator Tom Cotton have written to Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross. In their letter, they asked Ross to act quickly to ensure Washington isn't helping strengthen China's army. Schumer and Cotton say China aims to acquire American technology for military and civilian use. Well, as the protests continue in Hong Kong, Chief Executive Carrie Lam says protesters are still inside Hong Kong's Polytechnic University. Up to 200 anti-government protesters remain barricaded inside the university, surrounded by police, as the standoff continues for a third day. More in this report.
The chief executive was speaking after China's State Council appointed Tang Ping-kyung as the new police chief of Hong Kong. Lam said she had told police to try and resolve the situation peacefully.
The two important principles that I have laid out for the police operation. The first is, of course, to have a peaceful resolution as far as possible. This objective could only be achieved with the full cooperation of the protesters.
Meanwhile, China has rejected the Hong Kong High Court ruling against the ban on banning face masks.
The United States says South Korea should share more of the cost for hosting the US military. Defense Secretary Mark Esper's statement came after Seoul broke off the talks earlier in the day following a public backlash. However, Esper added that the US State Department is holding more negotiations. South Korea's foreign ministry said Washington's demand for an increase in defense costs is not acceptable. Seoul said it's willing to pay its fair share to strengthen the South Korea-US alliance. The current SMA agreement stands at $870 million a year. Under the SMA, Seoul has shared the cost of almost 30,000 troops stationed in the country since 1991. Well, we'll be back with more news from around the world right after this short break. Hello again, it's good to have you back. Now, in what seems like a diplomatic embarrassment for India over occupied Kashmir, an Indian government representative was thrown out of the Asia-Pacific Summit in Cambodia. BJP leader Vijay Jolly was removed from the premises after he tried to block Pakistan's National Assembly Deputy Speaker Qasem Suri's speech on Kashmir. In his speech, Suri told attendees about India's clampdown in the valley for the last 107 days. As Suri was sharing the detail of ongoing rights violations, Jolly started yelling that Kashmir was India's internal matter. The security at the summit approached him and removed him from the hall for disrupting the proceedings. Former Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif has left the country to seek medical treatment in the United Kingdom. He left after the Lahore High Court allowed him to travel abroad for 2 months for medical treatment in London. The former Prime Minister left on a Qatar Airways air ambulance along with his personal doctor and staff. Nawaz Sharif was disqualified by the Supreme Court in April 2017 and sent to jail on corruption charges. For the last month, he's been under intensive care after the level of platelets in his blood kept on fluctuating. Ukraine has threatened Russia with a $12 billion penalty if it obstructs the extension of a transit gas pipeline agreement. The warning comes as the 10-year contract for the transit of Russian gas through Ukraine, Nord Stream 2, is set to expire next month. Russian gas exporter Gazprom proposed an extension of the current deal or a new one-year agreement. But Ukraine objects to the one-year extension and is pushing for another 10-year commitment. The executive director of Ukraine's national oil and gas company Naftogaz, Yuri Vitrenko, said the case will be taken up at an arbitration court. Russia proposed resuming gas supplies to Ukraine that it cut off in 2015 at a price reduction of 25%. But the Ukrainian Energy and Environment Minister Alexei Orzal said Kiev rejects the proposals as inadmissible. 15 people have been killed and 9 others injured in a coal mine explosion in China's northern Shaanxi province. Officials say the blast trapped 35 miners inside the mine in Pingyao County. State media says 11 miners managed to escape the pit. It said the injured are in stable condition and an investigation to find out the cause of the explosion is underway. It said poor safety measures led to the fatal incident. Now in Australia, Sydney is blanketed with haze as bushfires rage across the region. Strong overnight winds brought smoke from fires inland, pushing the air quality to beyond hazardous levels. Parts of the city recorded pollution levels 8 times higher than the national average. More than 110 fires are currently burning across Australia's east, with dozens of blazes still uncontained. 6 people have been killed and hundreds of homes destroyed in bushfires across New South Wales and Queensland since September. Health officials are advising people to stay indoors.
All we can do is encourage people to be vigilant, to take whatever precautions they can, avoid the exposure. Don't exercise, which puts extra pressure on your lungs on a day like today when they're already under strain.
Now in Dubai, Atlantic conditions have been recreated to raise thousands of salmon in tanks. In a control room, Norway's sunrises and cool currents are the order of the day, despite searing conditions outside in Dubai. More about the fish and the farm in this report.
Dubai is no stranger to ambitious projects, but salmon farming in the desert was unimaginable. Inside the facility in the middle of Dubai's desert, waters flow and temperatures fluctuate to create the most desirable conditions for the salmon living in 4 vast tanks. Salmon live in cold water, which is why raising it in a country where temperatures can reach up to 45 Celsius is a stretch, to say the least.
نسويها تيار حامي تيار نهر بسيط نسوي له بعد deep sea. We do this every morning.
Established in 2013, Fish Farm bought some 40,000 fingerlings from a hatchery in Scotland and thousands more eggs from Iceland. It produces 10 to 15,000 kilos of 100% organic salmon every month.
It is, but I think also the quality, I tried different salmons before and this is less greasy. At least my family prefers this one, the organically produced.
The UAE imports more than 92% of its fish from abroad, and Mubarak said they would like to meet that demand at home instead.
Well, salmon fishing in the desert Dubai never seems to surprise me. Now, in Indonesia, a workshop in turning industrial waste and chicken feathers into decorations is aiming to reduce waste and generate an income from the local community. More in this report.
As cockerels crow in the background, workers craft life-sized figures of chickens from factory waste such as foam and scraps of fabric. They later cover the figurines with feathers taken from chicken slaughterhouses. 35-year-old Tarjaya, who like many Indonesians only uses one name, employs 6 to 10 people from the community at his workshop.
When I saw the waste, I felt that it was a pity. The material can be used to create artwork, for example, and so we can benefit and use it too.
The rooster decorations are sold widely outside the town and even abroad through social media. The workshop produces 60 to 200 rooster figurines in a month, selling each for approximately $18.
The figurine is nice and looks so real. Secondly, this is purely made from waste material. I appreciate Terjaya because he is helping people to earn more income.
In a country that produces 175,000 tons of garbage a day, local environmentalists hope this initiative can help reduce and reuse waste.
Now, in business news, the U.S. Treasury Department says that Russian holdings of U.S. debt increased from $8.5 billion to $10 billion in September. In a statement, the department said long-term Treasury securities were around $3 billion, while short-term at nearly $7 billion. Russia, once a significant holder of U.S. state debt, started selling off U.S. Treasury securities last year, as Russian holdings were nearly halved from $96 billion to nearly $49 billion. Japan remains the biggest holder of U.S. state debt, with over $1 trillion, followed by China. Well, U.S. President Donald Trump has complained to Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell about high interest rates. The U.S. central bank has cut rates 3 times this year to offset damage caused by the trade war between China. At a White House meeting with Powell, Trump said he protested the high interest rates compared to other countries. Trump said the rates should be lower as it hurts manufacturers and economic growth. In August, Trump called Powell an enemy of the U.S. on par with Chinese leader Xi Jinping for not cutting interest rates. Now we take a look at the stock markets, and European stocks have hit a 4-year high despite uncertainty and pessimism over the outcome of trade talks between the United States and China. London's FTSE 100 gained over 1% as the tech company Halma filed an upbeat half-year report. The status of trade talks between China and the US remains a focus for global investors. Frankfurt's DAX is also trading over 1% higher. The CAC 40 in Paris has also gained a fraction. Asian stocks were closed as investors remain confident about a deal between the two economic powerhouses. Well, it's 22 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all the news for now, and that's all from me and the team here in Lahore for now. But we'll be back with the top of the hour for the headlines, and for the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Bye-bye.